For centuries, millions of pilgrims walked across the Church of the Holy Sepulchre without knowing what was hidden beneath their feet. This is the church that surrounds the tomb of Jesus, and every stone inside it is tied to faith, history, and old rules. Then, in 2022, an important floor repair forced workers to move the old stones. And what started as a routine exposed sealed, hallowed secrets, but then a deeper clue appeared under the sacred floor, and the work came to a sudden halt. Here's what they found: the repair that exposed Jerusalem. For the first time in generations, workers began removing the old floor stones around the tomb of Jesus inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. They were working inside a living church in the heart of Jerusalem's old city, while pilgrims still walked nearby, priests still prayed, and people still came to touch one of the most sacred places in Christianity. The workers had to move in narrow paths around barriers, tools, worshippers, and ancient walls. One wrong decision could damage the site, block a service, or disturb an agreement older than many countries. That pressure was there from the start. Every move had to respect a place where faith, history, and old church rites all meet in one crowded room. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is built over the place where Christian tradition places Calvary, also called Golgatha, and the tomb of Jesus. Inside it stands the small shrine around the tomb called the edicule. The edicule seen today is not from the time of Jesus. It was rebuilt in the early 19th century after a major fire, but it still surrounds the older tomb area that Christians have honored for centuries. That made the floor far more than a repair problem. It sat around the shrine that protects the tomb. It carried the steps of pilgrims from many countries. It also covered older layers that almost no one had been allowed to touch for a very long time. Even getting permission was hard. The church is shared mainly by the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate, the Roman Catholic Franciscans through the custody of the Holy Land, and the Armenian Patriarchate. Their rights inside the church are controlled by an old rule called the status quo. It comes from Ottoman-era agreements, and it decides who controls each space, who performs each act, and how changes can be made. In most buildings, replacing a bad floor is simple. Here, even a small change can cause trouble, because every corner has meaning. A doorway, a step, a lamp, a stone, even a ladder can become sensitive if one group thinks another group is gaining control. So the floor could not be opened until the main communities agreed on the work. The old floor had become uneven and damaged in places, and the hidden systems beneath it also needed attention. The church could not keep delaying the work without risking more damage. That agreement came in 2019, after long talks and years of delay. The goal was to restore the worn floor, improve the hidden infrastructure below it, and study whatever appeared during the work. On March 14, 2022, Sapienza University of Rome began the archaeological work connected to the restoration. The team was led by Francesca Romana Stasola. The plan had to be careful from the start. The excavation was set up to run day and night, but only in controlled sections. Workers could lift stones in one area, record what they found, protect the open ground, and then move on. This allowed church services to continue and helped pilgrims keep moving through the building. The floor itself was already a puzzle. It was not one clean floor from one time. It was a mix of old and newer stones. Some pieces came from the 19th century. Some were linked to the Crusader period. Other pieces may have been older. Under that mixed surface were pipes, drains, cables, damp spaces, and older structures that had built up as the church changed over time. The job had started as a way to repair a worn and fragile floor, but once the first stones were removed, the team was no longer looking at just a floor. They were looking at Jerusalem stacked in layers, the city hidden under the stones. Once the first floor stones were removed, the church stopped looking like one building from one time. Under the surface was a buried stack of human life. Recent repair layers sat near the top. Older church remains appeared below them. Roman traces waded deeper down. Then came the much older ground used long before the great church stood there. The team could not open the whole church at once. That would have blocked worship and shut pilgrims out. So the archaeologists worked in separate zones. They opened one area, studied it, recorded it, covered it again, and then moved to the next. The full picture had to be built piece by piece, like a broken mirror with pieces spread across different rooms. To keep track of it all, the team used digital records. Every wall, stone, cut, pipe, coin, and layer had to be placed inside a larger map. Even though no one could stand inside one open trench and see everything at once, the data allowed the archaeologists to rebuild the hidden layout in the lab. The floor was still partly closed above them, but the buried city was slowly taking shape. In 2023, the work reached several key areas. One was part of the north aisle, one of the long side spaces inside the church. Another was a large part of the rotunda, the round area around the edicule. The team also worked in the northern medieval ambulatory, a walking passage. Each area gave them a different piece of the same buried story. Under those sections, they found remains tied to the early Christian complex. There were old walls, the head of an apse, a rectangular room, and a stone channel that once carried rainwater away. The apse was part of the rounded end of the ancient church. The room had already been suspected by earlier scholars, but now the ground gave it a clearer shape. The rainwater channel showed that this was not just a sacred space. It was also a real building that had to survive weather, crowds, and time. These finds helped fill in the plan of the 4th century church complex. They showed how the early builders shaped the site, where walls stood, and how parts of the first Christian structure connected with later spaces. Then came a colder trace of power. In the packed fill, archaeologists found 2 broken bricks stamped with the name of Legio X Fretensis. That was the 10th Roman Legion, a military force tied to Roman Jerusalem after the city had been crushed and reshaped under Roman rule. And the small finds kept coming. The team faced about 100,000 pottery fragments. That is a flood of broken bowls, jars, lamps, and everyday pieces that have to be cleaned, sorted, dated, compared, and understood. Some pieces may point to daily life. Some may point to building work. Some may seem boring alone, then become important beside another piece from a different trench. The same ground also held coins. In the eastern part of the rotunda, the team found a hoard from the 4th century. The earliest coin in that group came from the time of Constantius II. The latest coins came from the time of Valens. That placed the group in the age when the Christian complex was taking shape and changing. Food remains told another part of the story. Later layers held animal bones from sheep, goats, pigs, chickens, geese, pigeons, fish, and edible snails. Those bones brought the place down from grand history into real life. Builders worked here, priests served here, pilgrims came here. People ate, repaired, carried, prayed, and left tiny traces behind. Then the team found one of the strongest shapes under the current edicule. Beneath the shrine around the tomb was a circular marble base about 20 feet across. It was not loose rubble. It looked like part of an early structure built around the tomb itself. Ancient images from the 5th and 6th centuries show the tomb shrine as circular, and this buried base fits that idea. And the deeper the team looked, the more the place started to look like a scar cut straight into the rock. The stone quarry under holy ground. Archaeologists found that long before pilgrims entered this church, this ground was a stone quarry. Before the shrine, before the marble, before the candles, workers were cutting limestone from the hill. The surface was not smooth. It dropped and rose in hard steps. Some parts had been sliced away. Other parts were left behind as ledges when the stone was no longer useful. Francesca Romanastasola explained that this was not surprising, because large parts of Jerusalem's old city stand on quarried ground. Jerusalem was built from its own stone, and the marks of that work are still hidden below later streets, churches, homes, and walls. The quarry was already active in the Iron Age, between about 1200 and 586 BCE. During the excavation, the team found pottery, lamps, and everyday objects from that period. These were the small things people used, carried, dropped, broke, and left behind. Modern tools helped the team read that hidden rock without tearing the whole church apart. Ground-penetrating radar was used to scan below the floor. It helped map the depth of the bedrock, the thickness of stone slabs, and buried shapes under the church. It also showed signs of walls, channels, paved areas, cavities, and wet ground. That was important because the church could not be treated like an empty dig site. The team had to know where the stone dipped, where spaces might be hiding, and where older structures could be damaged. The radar did not give them the full story by itself, but it gave them a guide through ground that had been changed for thousands of years. Then the quarry began to explain something else. A stone quarry can become a burial area once the cutting stops. When workers no longer need a section of exposed limestone, the rock face can be used in a new way. Tombs can be carved straight into it. In and around Jerusalem, rock-cut tombs were part of the ancient landscape, especially in areas where the limestone was already exposed. Then the rock story changed again, because beneath the church, the team found signs that this rough quarry had once been softened into a living garden. The garden beneath the tomb. In a place that had once been cut for stone, the team found signs that people had later brought life back into the rock. The old quarry was not only a scar in the hill. At some point before the later Roman city covered the area, parts of it had been turned into cultivated ground. That discovery changed the feeling of the whole site. A quarry is rough. It is made by cutting, breaking, lifting, and hauling stone. A garden is the opposite. It means planning. It means care. It means someone looked at a place of exposed rock and decided it could still be used for something living. The first signs were not dramatic at a glance. They were low stone walls under the basilica floor. Between those walls, the team found dirt placed into the spaces. That may sound small, but in a rocky former quarry, it was not random. Dirt does not arrange itself between small walls for no reason. Someone had shaped these spaces, filled them, and made them useful. Those low walls pointed to small, cultivated plots. This was not loose waste dumped into a hole. It looked like ground prepared for plants, the kind of work done by people who wanted the land to produce something. Then the samples told a stronger story. Soil taken from beneath the church was studied for tiny plant remains. The analysis found traces linked to olive trees and grapevines. These were not the kind of weeds that appear and vanish without care. Olive trees and grapevines point to cultivation. They point to land that was being managed, watched, and used. The dating came from the layers around the samples and the wider setting of the excavation. It showed that the farming happened before the later Roman city covered the area. This discovery cannot be ignored. The Gospel of John says that at the place where Jesus was crucified, there was a garden, and in that garden was a new tomb, where no one had yet been laid. The evidence under the floor does not identify a person. It does not turn faith into a lab result. It does not prove the resurrection, but it does line up with one clear detail in the old account. This area was not only rock and tombs. There were signs of cultivated ground near the sacred place remembered as Calvary and the tomb. The tombs cut into the rock. The garden was not the only thing the old quarry held. As mentioned earlier, by the time of Jesus, this former quarry was also used as a burial site. Several tombs had been cut into the rock. They were not all on one neat level because the quarry itself was uneven. As parts of the quarry were slowly abandoned, different rock faces became available. Some were high, some were lower, some were shaped by earlier cutting. That gave families places to carve burial spaces straight into the limestone. This fits the way parts of Jerusalem looked in the 1st century. Wealthier families often used rock-cut tombs outside the city. These were not simple holes in the ground. They were carved rooms. Inside there could be benches or shelves where a body was placed after death. The stone kept the tomb cool and closed off. A family could return later, and in some tombs, bones could be gathered and placed in smaller spaces or containers. The tomb belonged to a family, not just one person. That kind of tomb also fits the long tradition connected with the Holy Sepulcher area. Christian tradition says Joseph of Arimathea gave a new tomb for the burial of Jesus. Within the Holy Sepulcher compound, there are other ancient tombs too, including one traditionally linked with Joseph of Arimathea. That does not settle every question, but it shows how strongly the memory of burials has stayed attached to this tight piece of ground. The most powerful look inside the tomb area came in October 2016. During restoration work on the edicule, the burial place inside the shrine was opened for the first time in centuries. The moment was brief, controlled, and tense. The team was not digging wherever they wanted. They were working inside a shrine that millions of people see as holy. The first thing they dealt with was the marble covering over the burial bed. That marble had protected the stone below for a very long time. When it was pulled back, the team found debris beneath it. After that, an older, broken marble slab appeared. A cross was carved into it. Then, beneath that slab, they reached the original limestone surface of the burial bed. That limestone bed was the part everyone had been waiting to see. It was not a loose stone placed there later. It was the rock surface of the tomb itself, the shelf cut from the cave wall. For centuries, it had been hidden under marble, partly to protect it from damage and from pilgrims who might try to take pieces of the sacred stone. The tomb was open only for a short time. Then it had to be sealed again. But before it was closed, samples were taken from the mortar between the limestone burial surface and the marble slab above it. The testing placed that mortar around AD 345. That date carried the site back to the time when the first great Christian shrine was being built there, long before the Crusader period. That dating did not identify Jesus by itself. Stone and mortar cannot name the body once laid in a tomb, but the results showed that the burial bed had been covered and honored in the 4th century, around the age when the tomb was first turned into a major Christian shrine. The wider burial area helps explain what happened next. The Holy Sepulcher did not begin as a church placed on empty ground. It stood over a former quarry that had become a burial zone, with tombs cut into limestone at different levels. From that group, one tomb was singled out. The surrounding rock was cut back, and the tomb linked with Jesus was isolated from the other burials in the area now covered by the rotunda. That act changed the whole place. A family burial area became the center of a vast shrine. The cut rock that once held several tombs was reshaped around one remembered tomb. But before Constantine could build around that tomb, another empire had already buried the whole place under a very different message. The empire that buried the site. The tomb area did not sit untouched from the time of Jesus until the first great church rose above it. The ground passed through war, Roman rule, new streets, new buildings, and a fight over memory. The place that early Christians remembered was not left open for everyone to see. Rome built over it. After Jerusalem was destroyed and reshaped under Roman power, Emperor Hadrian created a new Roman city in the first half of the 2nd century. He called it Aelia Capitolina. By then, the area around the tomb was no longer outside the city. It had been pulled into Rome's new plan for Jerusalem. The older edge of the city, with its cut rock and burial places, became part of a new Roman world. Streets were laid out. Buildings rose around the area. The ground that had once belonged to quarrymen, gardeners, and tomb makers was now inside an imperial city. Recent restoration work has shown signs of buildings from Hadrian's time around the Holy Sepulcher area. Those remains help explain what happened before the Christian shrine was built. Before the church was built under Constantine, the area was linked with a Roman pagan temple. Rome had covered the place with its own city and its own worship. That made the later Christian building project much more dramatic. Constantine's builders were not simply placing a church on empty land. They had to remove a Roman sacred structure first. Only after that could they reach the older rock and the tomb area below. Around AD 325 to 326, Constantine's representatives came to Jerusalem. Bishop Macarius of Jerusalem was tied to the search for the tomb. Historical accounts say the search led to the site beneath the Roman temple. When the Roman structure was taken away, a limestone tomb was exposed and identified as the burial place of Jesus. That moment changed the site forever. A buried tomb became the center of a major Christian complex. The builders shaped the area around the tomb, created a shrine, and built spaces for worship and pilgrimage. The place was no longer hidden under Rome's city. It was lifted into the open as one of the most important Christian sites in the world. But the church did not remain frozen after Constantine. It was damaged, repaired, attacked, and rebuilt again and again. In the 7th century, Persian forces set fire to the church during their attack on Jerusalem. The damage was serious, but the site still survived. It was repaired and drew worshippers. Then came one of the worst blows in its history. In 1009, the Fatimid ruler Al-Hakim ordered the destruction of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Much of the sanctuary was torn down. The edicule was badly damaged. The old Constantinian design was never fully restored in its original form. Rebuilding came later, but the church that rose after that was not the same as the first one. Then in the 12th century, the Crusaders reshaped the site again. They joined several sacred spaces under one larger church and gave much of the building the form people still recognize today. Every age tried to claim the site, cover it, repair it, or reshape it. But each new layer also sealed parts of the older story below. The modern floor work became powerful because the workers were not only repairing stone, they were reopening a place where empires, faith, and memory had been stacked on top of each other for centuries. Why they had to stop digging. In a normal dig, archaeologists can keep widening a trench when the ground gets interesting. Inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, they could not do that. This was not an empty ruin with locked gates and open ground. It was a living church, filled with prayer, processions, and pilgrims. The team could not chase every clue as far as it wanted. Every open section had to fit around worship. Every barrier had to leave space for people to pass. Every move had to respect a church shared by communities with old rites. Temporary flooring helped keep the church open while the work went on. Pilgrims could still enter. Services could still continue. The building stayed alive above the trenches while the hidden ground below was measured, photographed, cleaned, and mapped. Then came the pause that showed the real limit of the excavation. In March 2025, no digging area was open because the church had to be ready for Easter. During Holy Week and Easter, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre becomes even more crowded and important to worshippers. The floor could not remain open. The sacred space had to be fully accessible. That was the real force behind the halt. Even when the digging paused, the research did not stop. The open trenches were only one part of the work. The team still had to study pottery, mortar, stone, soil, old plant remains, bones, and building materials. Digital models had to be built. Layers had to be compared. Samples had to be tested. Every fragment had to be placed back into the long story. About 100,000 pottery fragments were recovered. This shows why the final answers could not come quickly. Each piece had to be cleaned, sorted, dated, and studied. In October 2025, after 3.5 years of continuous work, the restoration team presented a report on the first phase. That phase included the archaeological excavation under the original pavement. The results showed a long sequence of history, from the Iron Age to the early 20th century. The ground under the church had not kept one story. It had kept many. After that, the work moved into another stage. Open spaces had to be filled back in. The ground had to be compacted. Hidden systems had to be improved. New flooring had to be installed around the rotunda. The goal was not only to study the past, but to make the church safe. By March 2026, the floor restoration was still underway. The work was still being carried out with the agreement of the Greek Orthodox, the Armenians, and the Catholic side, with La Sapienza University and the Venaria Restoration Center involved. The project was careful, slow, and controlled because the place allowed no other way. The discoveries do not prove everything people believe about the tomb. Stone cannot name the person once buried there. Mortar cannot prove a miracle, but the ground can still speak clearly. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.